I know the last few years have been tough, but today, COVID no longer controls our lives. More Americans are working than ever. Businesses are growing. Our schools are open. Millions of Americans have been lifted out of poverty. Millions of veterans once exposed to toxic burn pits will now get what they deserve for their families and the compensation. American manufacturers come alive across the heartland, and the future will be made in America.
All right, joining us now, Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York. She's also been making the case for her party through a series of recent town halls across the Empire State. It's great to have you back on the show. I'm curious, with the list of legislative wins for Joe Biden, Student Loan, Inflation Reduction Act, landmark legislation, the PACT Act, the CHIPS Act, gun safety bill, the list goes on. Are your constituents hearing about these wins, feeling the impact of them? Do you still feel like you have to explain the party's big message moving forward?
It's important to explain to folks what all this means to them personally. So, for example, in Queens, in our town hall, there was a lot of questions about mental health and public safety. And the answer to that is the gun bill that we just passed, a portion of it which I spent a lot of time working on, which is getting rid of gun trafficking. In New York State, more than about 90% of the guns used in crimes come from out of state, and almost all of them are illegal. And having money and making that a federal offense gives law enforcement more tools to get the guns out of the street. Second, the money for mental health in that bill is for violence disruption. And there's a lot of not-for-profits, there's a lot of schools, there's a lot of entities that are actually doing the work to make sure they can do violence disruption, to make sure we don't have shooters going into schools and places of worship, to make sure we don't have suicide rates, to make sure we catch these shooters before they commit these crimes. That works. And so they want to know about this. And so my job as their federal representative is to bring information about how to apply for that money, to do letters of support so they can get those resources. And so these town halls are fundamentally important for me to serve the community so they know what we're doing and how it is going to affect them.
Can you talk about the level of concern you've heard regarding the Supreme Court taking away a constitutional right to privacy that women have had for the past 50 years?
Well, you know, Joe, you said it exactly right. It's about the right to privacy. The way this Supreme Court decision by Alito was written said that women of reproductive years do not deserve a right to privacy. It doesn't apply to their reproductive freedom for the fundamental life and death decisions about when to have children, under what circumstances, with whom. And because the expanse of the right to privacy is something that we've counted on for over 50 years in this country, Justice Thomas went so far as to say, oh, yeah, I want to work on upending all the decisions under the right to privacy, the right to marry the person you love, the right to privacy in your bedroom, the right to reproductive care and contraception. All of those laws are under this right to privacy. And you have cases now in these red states where a mother and her daughter can't have a private conversation on Facebook, where people will be denied the right to freedom of the mail so they can receive medicine in the mail. They'll be denied the right to travel out of state to get health care. It's outrageous. And if the full country fully understood the weight of the lack of a right to privacy, I think they would be even more concerned. But I do think it's affecting how people see President Trump, the ultra-conservative justices you put on the court, and the agenda of these very, very conservative states and members of Congress.
It is fascinating, the list of cases that flow out of the same right to privacy that led to Roe. Yes, contraception, marriage equality. Interestingly enough, Justice Thomas didn't talk about loving that case, interracial marriage. But what is so disturbing I know a lot of my friends who are pro-life, who've always called themselves pro-life, are these extreme cases that they're hearing. A 10-year-old girl raped in Ohio that is forced to flee the state because she is led to believe that the centralized state is going to push her into a forced birth of the rapist's baby without any input from her mom or dad, without any input from her pastor, without any
doctor.
input from her mental health.
Yeah.
Right. Middle
a 10-year-old
health
could
official.
die in childbirth because their bodies aren't
Right.
developed enough to birth a child.
Exactly. Right. And I was going to say, and also from her medical care provider, this 10-year-old should have a team around her that can figure out the best way to help her survive this traumatic event. You have the example of a 14-year-old girl being raped by an uncle in Michigan that the Republican nominee for governor running against Governor Whitmer actually said that's the perfect example of why I would force the state to compel a forced birth. Like, talk about just the magnitude of this for, again, even people who consider themselves to be pro-life, how excessive, how extreme this has become in the heartland.
Yes. And it's also the denial of basic life-saving medical care. If someone has an ectopic pregnancy, if you don't have a DNC immediately, you will die. It's similar to many other problems that women will have, that they need access to that medical care to save their lives. And the decision was written with such a broad brush. It's just seismic in its impact to most of America for 40 years of their life. 51% of Americans will be of childbearing age for about 40 years.
Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, thank you very much for being on this morning. We look forward to talking to you again soon.